Resources Appointment and Equity Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 29th. Council Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Calling the roll, Ms. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, and I understand Mr. Jones will be unable to make it, and while it is not required, I'll make a motion to excuse his absence. Do I have a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. If there are no questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. That has been approved. Do we have any public comment?
No one has signed in.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the January 15th meeting. Do we have a second?
Second.
If it's been moved and seconded, if there are no questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right. If you'll read the first item into the record, please.
Resolution number 2019-0027, confirming the county executive's appointment or reappointment of various individuals to serve on the Cuyahoga County Corrections Planning Board for the term 1/1/2019 to 12/31/2021.
And Ms. Pomerantz, if you will give us a little background about this appointment, about this board and appointments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The Cuyahoga County Corrections Planning Board has very specific terms and requirements. Some of the appointments that were made at the last Human Rights Committee meeting, this next two will fulfill the requirements and the board will be compliant. And the first person is the Honorable K.J. Montgomery for a 3-year term beginning 1/1/2019 and expiring 12/31/2021. This is a reappointment, and the requirement is that a judge of a municipal court or county court of that county should serve. After speaking with staff, Martin Murphy, Honorable Judge Montgomery has been one of the longest-serving members of that corrections board, and both he as well as the county executive recommend a reappointment. And unfortunately, due to surgery, Judge Montgomery cannot be here, but she did write a letter expressing her interest as well as providing her resume.
Okay, thank you very much. And I understand Ms. Meredith Turner is here as a new appointment. Before we get into that, are there any questions from the committee for Ms. Pomerantz? Yes, Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, Ms. Pomerantz, could you give an overview of how many are on this board, how they're appointed, and what the basic responsibilities of the board are?
Sure. Basically, Councilman Miller, there and through the chair, there are 15 members of the Corrections Planning Board, and ORC requires very specific representation, including the administrator of the multi-county jail or workhouse located in the county, who is ex officio, County Executive Armand Budish, ex officio Honorable John J. Russo, presiding administrative judge, Honorable K.J. Montgomery, if she's reappointed, which is a requirement of a judge or municipal court or county court of that county, an attorney whose practice of law primarily involves representation of criminal defendants. That's also ex officio, which is Mark Stanton, who is the chief county public defender. We need to have the chief law enforcement officer at the largest municipal corporation, and that is Calvin D. Williams. The sheriff of Cuyahoga County, currently serving, is Clifford Pinckney. Honorable Michael C. O'Malley, which is also ex officio as a prosecutor. Scott Olszewski, which is also ex officio, meaning that they are not recommended or appointed by the executive, that they are required by law based on their title. And he is the CEO of the Adams Board. Number 10 is also ex officio, Kelly Petty. It must be the executive director of the County Board of Developmental Disabilities of that county or the executive directors of that organization's designee. You must have an administrator of a halfway house serving that county, or if any, the administrator's designee. And that is appointed by the county executive, and that would be Arthur B. Hill, who was recommended at the last committee meeting. The next ex officio, number 12, is Aaliyah McGee. You have to have an administrator of a community-based correctional facility, if any, serving the Court of Common Pleas in that county or administrator's designee. That person is administrator of Nancy R. McDonald Community-Based Correctional Facility, Aaliyah McGee, also ex officio. Then we have appointed by the county executive must include an administrator of Community Corrections Act funded in that court, which is Dean Jenkins, who was recently appointed at the last committee. There is a vacancy, of which Ms. Meredith Turner is being recommended by the county executive, which is one or more representatives of the public, one of whom shall be a victim of a crime. And then there is Christopher Violent, who is the chief of the Solon Police Department, appointed by the county executive as one or more additional representatives of the law enforcement community. And Honorable Dick Ambrose, which is also ex officio appointed by the president or admin of Common Pleas Court. Greg Popovich, also ex officio, who is the court administrator. And Maria Nemec, who is the chief probation officer, is also ex officio. And the last is Russell R. Brown, who was appointed last week as an official from the largest municipal corporation located in the county as the court administrator for Cleveland Municipal Court. Basic duties of this Corrections Planning Board include making recommendations, and I believe they meet quarterly, and they help make recommendations for the safety of the corrections planning all around, helping to work together to help provide better opportunities for members of the community who are going through the legal process.
Any further questions from the committee? Councilman?
Does the Corrections Planning Board have any oversight over the county jail, or does it only deal with other facilities?
I'm not sure, through the chair. I can find some information and get back to you. I do know that Martin Murphy was gonna come, but I don't see him here yet. I would think that there could be conversations in that advisory role. I don't know if that has been part of the agenda of their conversations in the past meetings, but I do know that they have a meeting coming up, I believe, in March.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, Ms. Turner, will you please step forward, state your name for the record, and give us a little bit of background on why you would like to serve on this board?
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, and to the other distinguished members of the council and everyone else gathered this morning. I am Meredith Turner, and it is my honor to be before you for consideration of this commission for several reasons. I feel I have the experience, having served a tenure of 10 years for United States Senator Sherrod Brown. In that capacity, I worked with the U.S. Department of Justice on a myriad of issues, also Homeland Security, served as a caseworker for immigration and citizenship, giving me a vast skill set to work with community leaders, specifically related to criminal justice issues. I'm an educator by training. I currently work for the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, where we advocate for people to be able to cast with transparency their vote. As it relates to this commission, I am a survivor of a few different offenses. One I'd like to share with you this morning is that my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was murdered by my grandfather. And so although I stand before you as a survivor, I have led my life through advocacy and work to make sure that others, whether they are victims or offenders, are represented in a way in our society that will make sure our society is a safer one moving forward. So I feel that I could be a contributing member to this commission based on my experience.
Thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for your willingness to serve and to share your personal experience with us. I think it is very noble and admirable for you to come before us with that. And I will open it up to my colleagues if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Well, I think most of us have worked with you in some capacity and are confident in your ability to serve in this role. So I am going to recommend that we move this to the full body of the council. And in the meantime, do we need to do this under second reading suspension? Do we know when the next meeting will occur?
The next meeting
Oh, okay. The Councilwoman Conwell has pointed out that this actually the term for the appointment is a little bit behind. So we'll go ahead and move this under second reading suspension. Do I have a second? Second. All right, it's been moved and second by this committee. If there are no further questions, comments, and concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you very much for your time and your
Thank you, Madam
service, and
Chair.
this will move before the full body of the council. Council Clerk, will you please read the next item into the record?
Resolution 2019-0028, confirming the county executive's appointment or reappointment of various individuals to serve on the Cuyahoga County Tax Incentive Review Council for the term 1/1/2019 to 12/31/2022.
I will turn it over to Michelle Pomerantz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The county executive respectfully requests that the Cuyahoga County Human Resources Appointments and Equity Committee consider the approval of Gregory Huth and Susan Infield for the Tax Incentive Review Council and the reappointment of Kenneth Surratt. All are four-year terms, and they expire in 12/31/2022. And pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, this is a board that has more than 30 municipalities in Cuyahoga County who are using some form of tax incentives for development purposes. And this council will draw on the experiences of these individuals with various county departments to help ensure that all aspects of tax incentives are being met. And to that end, I do have the Director of Operations for Fiscal Office, Lisa Rocco, here to help support and answer any additional questions, if that would be okay.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the committee? All right, we will move in the order of our agenda. Mr. Gregory Huth, if you'll please step forward.
Look at that bow tie.
Morning. Hi, I'm Greg Huth with the County's Department of Development. As far as my background, I've spent 10 years with the City of Cleveland, both in their law departments and in their Economic Development Department. And in the Economic Development Department, I was acting as either Assistant Director or the Director of the Department. And in the Law Department, I was the primary counsel for the Economic Development Department. So I've seen these projects at the city level, both from a policy perspective and from the legal perspective and how you put them together. In addition, I spent 2.5 years with the City of Cincinnati in their development department. I've seen how they can structure their economic development incentives in a bunch of different ways. There's a lot of really interesting ways, it can be different ways out there it can be done. I think I'd like to be able to take that experience and help out this board and these communities kind of work through these things when problems come up. Every once in a while, the project doesn't work out the way you want it to, so you got to figure out how to deal with that. And that's, I think, one of the things I have a real strength at. So.
Serving in your past capacity, can you touch on maybe a project that we might be familiar with where you helped utilize some of the skills that you'll bring to this commission?
Sure. There's a TIF on the Target that's out at 100 West 117th and I-90. And when the developer basically brought that project to the city and said, you know, I've gotten it this far, but I need $3 million. How can you help me? So we sat down and figured out that with some pretty generous terms to the city, that the city could make a loan out of its own funds rather than using a bond. And we structured a TIF that we used to repay the city that $3 million over a 20 or 30-year term. Now, it worked out really nicely because when we ran the numbers on that, we only looked at the Target. And then shortly thereafter, Giant Eagle moved in there, so it upped the TIF repayments, and I think it paid itself off a lot faster than what we originally projected it to do.
All right, thank you. I'll open it up to the members if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. All right, thank you for
Okay,
coming.
thank you.
All right, next up we have Ms. Susan Enfield. If you'll step forward, state your name for the record, and give us a little bit of your background and why you'd like to serve on this particular council.
Thank you very much. I'm Susan Infeld, and I'm the interim director of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. I actually wrote a little statement to make sure I wouldn't forget anything. I've been with the Planning Commission for 8 months and manage special initiatives, one of which is to write guidebooks to help municipalities in their operations. One of the recent guidebooks that I've been working on is a community reinvestment area. Prior to that, I served as mayor of the city of University Heights for 8 years and as a councilwoman there for 12 years. Personally, I've worked mainly in 3 industries in my working career: financial, healthcare, and government. I have a degree in finance with a concentration in public finance from the University of Illinois. I worked for 6 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago as a statistical analyst, technical writer, and financial analyst before moving to Cleveland. I've served as a patient representative, more commonly referred to as the ombudsman at St. Vincent Charity Medical Center. However, the majority of my working career in Cleveland has been with the City of University Heights as an elected official. I was on the City Council when the University Square development was built and first learned about TIF as a financing mechanism at that time. I believe that the University Square TIF in University Heights may have been the first TIF in Cuyahoga County. A TIF was so unique at that time that there was a lot of media coverage about it, both locally and nationally. Fast forward 10 years from the establishment of that TIF, and I was the mayor of University Heights, coping with the effects of the real estate downturn and the devaluation of the University Square property. My financial background and my personal experience with the University Square TIF give me a unique perspective about TIFs and the Tax Incentive Review Council. Additionally, my perspective as the interim director of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission allows me the opportunity to see how development fits within a community in Cuyahoga County. I would very much like to lend all of this experience to the work of the Tax Incentive Review Council. I was very happy to be nominated by County Executive Budish, and with your approval, would like to serve on the Tax Incentive Review Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I've had the pleasure of working with you on the Planning Commission. Just want to congratulate you on your interim appointment to the Executive Director. One of the things you touched on in your remarks were the declining properties that were inherited during the economic downturn as the mayor. As having, with your experience, how do you balance tax incentives with declining properties? Can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, a lot of it, as a mayor in a community that's dealing with that, obviously the whole reason behind the tax incentive is to encourage development, which any mayor or any citizen of a community would want to have. Once the values start to change and developers start to go before the Board of Review and say, hey, I don't want to pay all these taxes, it is difficult. So it's a constant communication with the developers to keep them invested in your community so that they won't just abandon the development and walk away. Because what no community wants is to have, a big hulking building that has no known intended use, certainly in the short term. So it is a real balancing act and constant communication.
All right, thank you. Communication is key. So I will open it up to my colleagues if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. All right, thank you for coming before us.
Thank you.
And our next candidate is Mr. Ken Surratt. Will you please step forward, state your name, and why you'd like to be reappointed?
Good morning. Ken Surratt with the Department of Development. Excuse me. Just quickly, my background is mostly finance, accounting, operations, early in my career in the retail space, but also a large part of my experience in education world as well. More recently, for the past 4 years, I've been with the Department of Development as the Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development. Also, in my role, I serve as the County Executive's designee to the County Land Bank Board and as Chair of the County Planning Commission. I believe all of these experience, the roles that I wear right now make me a strong candidate for the TURC. I think a big piece that Mr. Huth mentioned and Ms. Infeld mentioned as well is this really is about a community and how do these tax incentives help strengthen that community through both kind of a place-based view, but also as an economic engine for that community. I believe that they should serve as both. I served last year proudly, and I think learned a lot about each of the communities, and again, how we could actually help them in the various roles that I use in ensuring that, again, everything that the tax incentives that they use fit into both the placemaking and as an economic engine for those communities.
As the sole reappointment today, this morning, and thank you for sharing your background, what were some of or at least one of the challenges and one of the highlights that you experienced last year?
I think the highlight is actually getting to know communities that I didn't know very well. and how they use these incentives. There's a lot of variety, and I think what we've learned is that it depends on the community and the industries that are coming in. The biggest highlight. I think we just have a great community, and I'm glad to see that these incentives are used, and in most cases have had a very positive effect on the communities that they're in, even with some sort of reducing some of the taxes that generally will go to the public schools. The school treasurers understand the importance of these incentives as well to the community as a whole, and just seeing that they work together to ensure that, again, there's a greater benefit to using these tax incentives.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the committee. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns? All right, well, outstanding job. Thank you. Keep up the good work. It looks like this was the term started this month, so I will make a motion to move this to the full body of the council under second reading suspension. Do I have a second? It's been moved in second. If there are no further questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you for coming. Council Clerk, will you read the next item into the record?
Resolution number 2019-0029, confirming the county executive's appointment of various individuals to serve on the Cuyahoga County Division of Children and Family Services Advisory Board for the term 3/1/2019 to 2/28/2023.
And I'll turn it over to Michelle Pomerantz so you can give us a little bit of background.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Division of Children and Family Services, DCFS Advisory Board, was established in 2018 to further the cooperation and collaboration between the Division of Children and Family Services and other child care agencies in Cuyahoga County, and render advice to the division on policy matters pertaining to the provisions of services to children and families. This board shall also study the effectiveness and need for services to children and families in Cuyahoga County and encourage the gathering of information about the same population. This resolution and the individuals were a group of 10 individuals that were required by the legislation that was passed in October. And the members that are here today, all but one are present. And the one that is not here, unfortunately, is Dr. Andrew Garner, who is a pediatrician at University Hospitals, and he did submit a letter to explaining why he couldn't be here, but expressing his interest. It is on my behalf, as well as the county executives, that we will respectfully hope that you will consider these appointments and also consider suspending the rules so that this group can begin to meet immediately.
On that note, Michelle, can you give us the composition and the frequency that you think this body intends to meet, or will that be established upon approval?
It was the executive's intent, after considering the legislation, to give this to the direction of the board itself. Cynthia Weiskettel, the director, is here, and she will be leading and staffing that board. But the idea throughout the interviews with the committee members was that it would be similar in nature to the senior advisory board that is already established, and they do meet quarterly. That said, I believe a doodle poll will be going out as soon as these are considered and the council decides in this board, so that they can begin meeting immediately.
And the composition, does this complete the composition, or are there any other vacancies?
This would complete the composition. And it's a 4-year term, and we suggested a term beginning March 1st, 2019, which would follow the February 12th council meeting if approved. The variety of individuals here will have a chance to speak, represent most of the members that were recognized in the legislation, including members of the public health, including members of parent groups, education groups, and including customers who have used the services and experts in the field.
And are there any ex officio members here?
No, they're not. They're all, the 10 members are all appointees and have all been interviewed or recommended and or considered and discussed many, many times. I probably driven them crazy to make sure that I felt that they could help make up a board that would help support DCFS.
I'll open it up to my colleagues if you have any questions. Councilwoman Conwell?
Through the chair to Michelle, how many individuals applied for this?
We have had recommendations beyond these 10, I would say around 15 to 18. But the 15 to 18 were recommended and either could not decided through the process that they were either not fit or good fits, or they themselves turned down the recommendation. So there may be 4 to 5 other people who were not considered, but they were kind of self-selected themselves out because of either too much time commitment or an inability to serve because of their positions in current jobs.
I'd like to request a list of all the other names that didn't make it.
I'm happy to give that to you, and I might have that with me right now if you want me to bring it up to you.
Any other questions? Councilman Miller?
Not on this.
Madam Chair, Ms. Palmer, was any thought given to creating staggered terms so that their terms don't all end at once 4 years from now?
That was not something that came across to us. That is something I think that could be considered, but since the legislation didn't speak to it, it was something that I did not
I want to
determine.
amend the legislation anyway. Oops.
Councilwoman Conwell, do you have any other comments?
No, I'm gonna wait for a cent.
All right. I do think we probably need to look at some potential amendments, and I think that what may have been something that we discussed and may not have been entered into the original legislation, but I do support Councilman Miller's suggestion that the terms be staggered, so we might have to look at doing something like that. While we have quite a few people here, I understand there is one absent, so as the chair and being respectful of everyone's time here, I'm going to make a request that we keep our presentations brief. Our first candidate is Gabriella Celeste. If you'll step forward, state your name, and give us a brief background about your experience and why you'd like to serve on this committee, and then we'll open it up for questions if there are any.
Madam Chair Brown and members, and thank you for taking the time to consider my appointment to the committee. Created board, sorry about that. Clearly, I'm not used to this. And thank you also to our County Commissioner Budish for asking me to be a part of this effort. I take the prospect of serving in this capacity deeply seriously, given the personal and frankly, the too often traumatic nature of the DCFS work with our children and families. So I'm honored to be invited to serve our community in this way. I'm also, humbled and heartened by my colleagues, the group of candidates who joined me in their willingness to be part of this board. It would be a collaborative effort, and I see the breadth and depth of the experience and talent and commitment reflected by my colleagues here this morning speaks volumes, I think, of our greater Cleveland community and the willingness of people to step into what will surely be hard but necessary work. I'm confident we will work collaboratively with our public partners and other members of our community to ensure that this board offers a meaningful space for gathering community perspective and sharing valuable feedback to the Division of Children and Family Services. Those of you who know me know my North Star is fostering child well-being at home, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, our institutions, and our expressed values, our public policies. Ensuring we make good on our obligation to leave the world better than we found it for the next generation is what motivates me. As an attorney and advocate, an educator and learner, a challenger of systemic barriers, and a bridge builder, I've worked for what best supports children and families my entire career. From when I worked on a restorative practice program in Oakland, California for young people, to reforming the juvenile detention centers in Louisiana, to working on public policies that include fostering supports for young people aging out of foster care in Ohio. In my current role as policy director at the Schubert Center for Child Studies at Case Western Reserve, I work to ensure that credible research and data inform state and local policy efforts related to child well-being in things like education, health, child welfare, and justice system involvement. I also teach child policy classes to undergraduates and supervise policy interns placed in child-serving agencies and nonprofits throughout our greater Cleveland community. And ultimately, as a parent myself, I believe that we will only be a whole community when we treat all our children as our own, ensuring that every child is treasured. My heart goes out to Anaya Day Garrett's loved ones and too many other children and families who need support. I commend her father for pushing for broader reforms in the face of the terrible loss of his daughter, and I value the many hardworking Division of Children and Family Services staff who dedicate themselves to caring for some of the most vulnerable among us. As a citizen of Cuyahoga County, we all share in the public child welfare system we support, and we should do our very best to ensure the system is competent, just, and compassionate. As I'll end with a quote I often end with and that serves me in life, as James Baldwin so eloquently put it, "For these are all our children. We will all profit by or pay for what they become." Thank you for considering my candidacy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Looking through your resume, you have as you said, a broad and breadth and depth of experience, but it looks like you served for the Office of Early Childhood here. Can you touch on that?
Sure, that was many years ago. I was the Invest in Children's director and worked in the field of early childhood. It had actually, just before that, served as the director of the Alliance of Child Care and Service Providers, which works with children's mental health, behavioral health providers throughout the county, and was invited to consider looking at serving in the early childhood capacity. Worked with an incredible team of people, but also found that for me, my work was I found I worked best in a different kind of setting. So my tenure wasn't very long. I began then teaching and working at Case Western after that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair to Ms. Celeste, and this is a question that I'll ask each of you. Would you have any issues with expanding the scope of topics on this board? If it should come about with any amendments?
Not at all. I mean, certainly depending on the topics and the relevancy, but of course, certainly.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If
Thank
there are
you.
no further questions, comments, or concerns, I'll ask Ms. Beverly Charles to please step forward. State your name for the record and your desire to serve on this committee, along with a little bit of your background.
Good morning to the council and Madam Chair. I'd like to thank you. It's an honor to be considered to be a member of this committee. And hopefully I look forward to serving. And a little of my background, I have worked in government, U.S. House of Representatives for some 20 years under the late Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs Jones and under Marcia Fudge. I am a recent retiree of the office of Marcia Fudge. So I do have a little time on my hands, but I think I bring a wealth of not only commitment and passion, but I have worked in the capacity of the U.S. Congress with children and families. And I think we all know that currently children and families are in peril. Whether they face challenges inside the family unit or whether outside sources, they still are facing many challenges. I think with my experience in doing constituent services for both congresswomen, I can really help fill that gap based on what the type of need is. And I do look forward, hopefully, to working with this committee and making the lives of our children and our families much safer. I thank you
Thank you very
for
much.
your time.
All right. I've had the privilege of working with you on the infant mortality first year Cleveland. Are you still holding that capacity as well, working in that capacity?
Not really, but there are some boards that I'm still currently serving on, and some advisory boards. So I possibly will be going back to that
Okay.
board also.
All right. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Councilwoman Conwell?
Through the chair to Ms. Charles, good morning.
Good morning.
Would you have any issues with expanding the scope of topics on the Citizens Board if some amendments come into play while you're serving?
Not at all.
Thank you. And they would all be in the realm of HHS, just to let you know.
And my colleague is the chairwoman of HHS, so these appointments are very near and dear to her. So you may have overheard us speaking amongst ourselves. We serve on that committee, and again, would like to see some other things potentially coming up on the horizon.
That would be fine.
Gentlemen, any questions, comments, or concerns? All right, thank you, Ms. Charles.
Thank you.
Our next candidate is Dr. David Crampton. If you'll please step forward and give us a brief background of your experience and your desire to serve in this capacity.
Good morning, and thank you. And Councilmember Brown, I'm a constituent. I voted for you. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but I do live in your district. Or maybe I'm not supposed to say that. I don't know. So let me just briefly say I'm recovering from a stroke, and I think I'm making good progress. But I do cry easily. I'll try not to cry today. We're talking about child abuse. We're talking about child fatality. It is a sad topic. I'll try to hold it together. I also talk way too long, so I've got a little thing here. I'll try to keep it brief. I'll work with you. Okay, you'll help me with that. I appreciate it as a constituent that you would help me with my time. So my background, I worked in politics for a while, and then I decided to go to graduate school to study policy analysis at the University of Michigan. Then I happened to get a job in a research center at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. This was at the time when we were taking the administrative records of children in foster care to study factors that contribute to how long children are in foster care. So with some colleagues, I developed a model that showed that children in Michigan who entered foster care from Wayne County, which is where Detroit is, it's sort of like the Cuyahoga of Michigan. Not as cool, of course, but similar. So we showed that children from Wayne County, African-American children, and children who entered as infants stayed in foster care much longer than other children. This was consistent with findings in Illinois and other places. I sent the model up to Lansing, and I got this nice letter back from their Human Service Department saying, thank you for this. We find it very believable. We would appreciate any suggestions you have for any practice or policy implications of what you found. And I wasn't quite sure what, I've just pointed out that your system systematically doesn't work against African Americans, infants, and kids from Wayne County. My point is you should pay attention to that. So I was a little frustrated. I decided to go back to school, get an MSW and a PhD in political science and social work, and do more research in the field of foster care. One day I got a call from a program officer in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She said, we want to start a family group decision-making program in Grand Rapids that specifically targets families of color, because we feel like there's too many children of color in our foster care system. And they had heard about this family group conferencing effort from New Zealand, where the indigenous people of New Zealand, called the Maori, rose up and said, we're tired of our kids being taken from us and being placed in homes of European descent. So they got their country to pass a law that says you cannot place a child in foster care or in the juvenile justice system without first having a meeting of the child's extended family. And so they wanted to try this process in Grand Rapids. So I agreed to evaluate it. I wrote my dissertation about this program. It was successful. And then it was time to get a job. And so I applied for faculty positions all over the country. I was fortunate to be invited to come to Cleveland to interview at the School of Applied Social Sciences at Case. And I told them, look, I'm used to working very closely with a local public child welfare agency. And they said, okay, well then we'll make arrangements for you to meet with them. So when I came for my interview in 2002, I gave a job talk, all that kind of stuff. Then I drove down to the Hunter building and I met with a deputy and I said, I'm applying for this job at Case. If I come here, I want to work with you. And basically he said, well, if you know something about family meetings, if you know something about this disproportionality issue, and you know something about using data to help social workers do better with their job, we'll put you to work. So I got the job, came here, and worked for many years with DCFS. I can't point to any specific project where I can say, wow, that was... Then in about 2009, the Plain Dealer did a series of articles called The Children's Crusade, which were focused on cases of families served by DCFS where the children subsequently died. So Deb Forkas asked me to chair a panel of local people to kind of look at what can we do to improve the system. So I don't know, we had about 28 members. We made way too many recommendations, but I tried to work the system. Then when we had the change in government, I was contacted by the Fitzgerald people and they're like, okay, so what can we do to improve DCFS? And I was like, well, I got a whole list of recommendations here, but they all cost money. And well, since you guys are on the HH, you know, we're kind of constrained by what the feds will pay for and stuff like that. But there was interest in that time in this concept of pay for success, which I know you're familiar with. And the county executive really wanted to try this idea of propose a new way of doing business that saves money, attract outside investors, and they put the money in, and if it saves money, they get paid back. So he wanted to try that. When they did a scan of county government and said, where do we spend a lot of money? One of the places we spend a lot of money is foster care. So it became, can we come up with a pay for success deal in foster care? Meanwhile, over at Frontline, they were experimenting with some of the new methods of serving homeless families. And so they said, how about if we apply these homeless services to families involved with DCFS? Surely that could save money. So at the Poverty Center where I work at Case, we have the homeless data and we have the DCFS data. So we were able to match the data to look for potential cost savings in that dual population. And then the clock was ticking. And so for many years, really, we were trying to figure out, can we make a case for housing people will save money in foster care? And the clock was ticking, and then somebody said, you know, if we don't figure this out by the end of 2014, there'll be a change in county executive, all this work could potentially be lost. So David figured this out, find a way to make this work. And I was just telling my colleagues, I did a mistake. I put it on myself. It was like, David, if you can't solve this puzzle, dozens of homeless families won't get this help. And So I looked at our data and it suggested that children in Cuyahoga County whose parents have recently been in the homeless shelter were in foster care about 25% longer than children who didn't have that experience. So I said, well, let's make the argument that if we were to house the moms, we could reduce the foster care by 25%. That was quite a stretch, to be honest with you now, but it worked. And we were able to pull a deal by December 2014.
I'm going to stop you there,
Okay.
just because I think it's clear to me that you have a ton of experience and and an amazing wealth of knowledge around the areas, specifically around foster care and having our children in the system. And I think you will be a tremendous asset to this body, and it's clear to me why you were selected to be one of the candidates for this committee. So with that said, and I know that Councilman Miller is very familiar with Pay for Success, and to your point, I would say that having the council members in their staggered election cycles also enabled us to hold on to that institutional knowledge and keep that program rolling, which I know Councilman Miller was a huge champion of as well. So with that said, I would like to open it up to my colleagues if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Councilman Miller, we'll start with you.
Madam Chair, Dr. Crampton, I just want to say that it was indeed a pleasure to work with you on the Pay for Success project, and you have a wealth of knowledge as to how to bring concrete data to bear in making positive change, and that's certainly something we need on this board. So I appreciate your willingness to serve, and I just have to take this opportunity to ask for your insight as to how much success we achieved on the Pay for Success project, and what the results were as you see them.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Miller. As you know, we won't finish our study of that program until the end of this year. So all I can really say at this point is it looks very promising. And I can, as a little teaser, I can say it's probably going to be especially effective with African American children. So I'm going to end up coming back full circle. I'm going to be able to write to that guy in Lansing, and you know, if you would provide some of the creativity that we have in Cuyahoga County, you could start making a better system. So I can't tell you what the results are because we're not quite done with our study. The initial results are promising. It's sort of, it's not rocket science. I mean, if somebody's homeless, their ability to work a case plan is pretty limited. So yes, we found that housing them allows them to start to address some of the concerns that were raised when their children were placed in foster care. So we've seen a lot of benefit to the program, and we've seen a lot of creative collaboration between DCFS and Frontline and CMHA. I should say CMHA has been a good partner, and it's been a nice example of how, you know, you can go to CMHA and say, if we were to prioritize certain clients as needing housing because we're trying to get their kids returned to them, are you willing to prioritize them with us? And they are, and they've been fabulous. So when we all work together, we can do a lot of good work. Now, this population of families who struggle with both homelessness and child maltreatment is a very challenging population. So providing safe housing for them is a huge help, but it doesn't address, you know, their addiction, their mental health, their family violence. There's a whole host of other things that we also need to work on. And we're learning how to do that. And we're learning that housing helps with all of those problems, but doesn't solve them. But I think the spirit of it, if we can learn to all work together, we can do better for the kids. And that's, I want to bring that data to this process.
Thank you, Doctor. Any other questions, Councilman Miller? And just Councilman Miller, if you, for those who aren't aware, can you briefly just touch on what Pay for Success is, just very briefly?
Yes, Pay for Success addresses a very fundamental problem that comes up over and over again in government, which is that we say, if we could do such and such, often of a preventive kind of nature, we could save a lot of money down the road. But the problem is where to come up with the upfront investment. And so what we do with Pay for Success is that we ask the foundation and the investment community to invest in a program on the agreement that if the program achieves the anticipated savings, that then the government will pay them back for their investment, sometimes with a little bit of interest on top of that. And for the foundation community, this is a very attractive proposition, because when you think of what foundations normally do, they make grants, and once they make the grant, that money is gone. But this gives them the prospect of making an investment in developing some new program that's in accord with their fundamental purpose. And if it works well, then they get paid back and they can reinvest that money in another project. So it creates a circular capability. So I hope I've given the gist of it, but that's what we've done. And I would just add that the project that we did was the first Pay for Success project done at the county level anywhere in the United States and probably the world. So we were truly groundbreakers on this.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Mr. Crampton, would you have any issues with expanding the scope of topics on the Citizen Advisory Board?
Well, I think I agree with my potential colleagues that, of course, as long as it's relevant, I mean, it's a pretty big plate already, but of course, we would expand the scope as appropriate.
Because you mentioned homelessness, and my concern is, if many of you are wondering, is there was something similar to this advisory board years ago, and it kind of fell off and it died. So just making sure that that doesn't happen again, and that it's plenty for you guys to do.
We'll stick to it, I think.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Doctor. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank
your
you.
time and your willingness to serve in this capacity. Our next candidate, please step forward, and that is, who do we have next?
Sonia Emerson.
Sonia Emerson. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your
morning.
consideration. My name is Sonia Emerson again. My pronouns is she, her, and hers. I do that for a reason. I work at an agency called Connect. It's a nonprofit agency, and we focus on permanency and relationships. Specifically, I work with individuals that identify as LGBTQ, and that's our young people ranging from age 14 through 26. And so we focus on permanency because we believe that there's legal permanency, but the flip side to that is there is relational permanency, and we want to reconnect young people with their families. And so I could talk about the work that I do all day, but I really want to talk about the personal lenses and passion that I have for this work. I, at the age of 2, entered into child welfare services, and I left and aged out at 18, and I was homeless after that for a year, and I had to find my own grounding. And so after that, I unemployed and not educated. I really had to figure out what I wanted to do, and I thought that I could work around doing that without education. And so I tried, and I started advocacy work through volunteering with A Place for Me, which is a local initiative to end youth homelessness. And so what we found through a lot of dialogues and forums that I served on was that relationship was the issue, and that was key. And so a lot of times as a prior foster care alumni, I'm recognized as just that, but I am now a kinship care to my niece right now. And what we know is a lot of times when you're in foster care, unfortunately, you're at higher risk for worse outcomes. And so that reflects a lot in my life with the young lady I have at home. But I tell her a lot that opportunity isn't about success unmet, but it's about your potential that you haven't yet recognized yet. And so I think that once I recognized my potential, that was only through the relationships that I had created. And so I had to go and find those relationships. I did that through networking, through finding my social capital in my community. But I represent a lot of young people, but more than that, I want to represent my community. And so I think that this is a perfect opportunity for me to do so. And so I say that I have worked on a lot of projects, most recently the Family First Prevention Act with Commissioner Jerry Milner. And we talk about just kind of focusing on preventative acts beforehand, before young people enter into the foster care system, and what does that look like and how we can do that. And I believe how we can do that is best serving our parents and treating our parents and our families with dignity. And I know firsthand, even as a professional, I still don't get treated with the utmost respect and dignity, again, because people see me through the lenses of a foster child. And so that doesn't anger me. It inspires me to kind of move forward and serve to change what that looks like for a lot of the families in my community. And so that's why I'm here before you today.
All right, thank you very much. I know Councilwoman Conwell has her question. I'll look to my right, gentlemen. No? All right, Councilwoman Conwell.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Emerson. Would you have any issues with expanding the scope of topics on the Citizens Advisory Board? It seems like you have.
Not at all. Anything that serves people serves me, and I can serve. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm excited about your candidacy. The youth and energy that you bring, I think, will be a tremendous asset, and I thank you for your willingness to serve. If there are no further questions, comments from the committee, I'll move on to our next candidate, who is
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen Farmer. If you'll please step forward.
Good morning, council members. So my name is Kristen Farmer, and I was very excited and honored to be recommended for this post or position on this county advisory council. I am the founding president and CEO of Birth and Beautiful Communities, which is a workforce development agency, but also a perinatal support agency, as our mission and vision is around the prevention of poor birth outcomes, particularly for African American women. As many of the people in this room know, the county and the state of Ohio has a terrible infant mortality problem, particularly Black infant mortality problem. And within our organization, we serve mothers, fathers, babies, but also children, because a lot of the families that come into our program, they have older children. And so a lot of our time, a lot of our resources are spent for advocating for those families or advocating for those children. We are in the staffings, we are at the courts, and I still take direct clients as well too. So I'm also at staffings and I'm also in juvenile court as well. And so I respectfully, to the question that Councilwoman Conwell asks at the end of this, I think that more is needed. I think that we have to focus on everything or do nothing, because in order to address the issues and the disparities, really, I always say that as African American people, we are 200 plus years behind in wealth, in social capital, and every type of capital, and that impacts and affects our health and well-being of our children and of our families. And the other part of this too, I say, is the trauma that families, that they have been through, and so it's passed down generationally. And so without us addressing that and providing that support, providing that nurturing, providing that care, I think that we won't get anywhere. And so I think that more is needed, actually, in being able to address different issues and tie it all into why we see these issues impacting our families within our communities. So with that being said, I am humbled again to even be recommended for this council.
Well, you two I've had the pleasure of working with on First Year Cleveland, and I know that your knowledge and experience in working in that capacity has been very impressive to me. And so I too am excited about your recommendation to be appointed to this body. So with that said, I will open it up to my colleagues if there are any questions, comments, or concerns. And it sounds like she answered your question, which is one of the reasons I admire this young woman. She's very proactive. So thank you very much. If there are no further questions, comments, or concerns, thank you for coming in your time. Our next candidate is Dr. Andrew Garner, and he's the university hospital doctor, and Ms. Pomerantz spoke about him. He has provided this committee with a letter expressing his desire to concern, and so I'll leave that to my members to review prior to making our final vote. And next we have Angela Newman-White.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Like my colleagues, I am very grateful and humbled to be considered and recommended to serve on this advisory board. I work with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health and work to coordinate and oversee all of the maternal and child health programs. One of which is the Ohio Equity Institute. The majority of my time is spent looking at systems changes and integration and how we can provide better opportunities for our families. A lot of the work that we do is heavily data-driven, but we have recently, in the last 5 years, recognized the importance of incorporating feedback directly from the community. So not just looking at numbers, but real stories and experiences and influences that the community has to inform all of the program services and policy recommendations that we put up front. My first job out of college, I have a sociology background, a master's in sociology from Cleveland State, was working actually with Cleveland Christian Home with children that were placed in a group home setting. To my surprise, and not being exposed to this population, I was taken back by the lack of resources that the families or the children in this setting were provided, and also the training for the staff that was kind of put in place to care for them. From that, I moved on, which I had noted because it's so far back in my resume, to work in a transitional housing unit for youth that were aging out of foster care. And that was through the Agape Center, which was also under the Cleveland Christian Home infrastructure. And at that time, too, though I had the education background, I lacked the experience, but was put in a position at the age of 23 to kind of serve as a mentor for young men and women aged 18 to 21 who were transitioning out into the community. Not feeling effective in that role, I moved on to work with mental health organization and kind of landed in public health. Realizing that in this capacity, I had the power and the influence to change systems, and how can we support staff as they are providing services to our community members. We do a lot of work with the Ohio Equity Institute on supporting community-based organizations with training and unifying messaging, not only around evidence-based practices and intervention, but how to ensure cultural competency and really taking into account their role and their influence in the consumers' lives that they're serving. A lot of the work right now, I oversee the Child Fatality Review, so we do review all deaths of children under the age of 18, and recognizing the implications not only with the needs within the systems to make some recommended changes, but also how can we do a better job of leveraging the other systems so we can better support families, because it's not just about housing, but it is also about employment opportunities, transportation, education, and things of that nature. We do have a significant disparity across the county and lack of investment, not only in the city of Cleveland, but primarily in those first-ring East Side suburbs. And so, through the Ohio Equity Institute work, partnership with First Year Cleveland and my colleagues here, I think it's really important that we try to do a lot of systems integration and tapping into all of the different social determinants of health so we can, wrap around our families.
Okay. I might have my data mixed up, but were you involved with the 44128?
Yes.
Okay, can you kind of just touch on the success that you had with that, and if there are any potential parallels with that you can see with this community, this board?
Yes, so one of the efforts with our Ohio Equity Institute was to do kind of a place-based initiative. Prior to that, we had been doing some systems level changes, but we wanted to focus on one particular community. And so we worked with our larger coalition and looked at different zip codes, and we'll kind of honed down into 44128 or 44105. We settled on working on 44128 because this community was comprised of both city and county communities. That's the Warrensville and the Lee Harvard area of Cleveland, and has historically had 8 to 10 infant deaths every year for the past 20 years. 2 deaths were occurring in hotspots areas in Warrensville. There's 2 in Warrensville and 1 in Cleveland. And we wanted to engage the community on what they felt would be the solution, because we did have the clinical institutions in place, and there's their home ownership and things like that. It's a little different. The community is not as traditional as some others would be. There's a lot of single family homes. There's there's actually higher percentages of father-headed households in 44128. And so we wanted to engage the community. They came together and felt that the need was around addressing social isolation. We came in with our ideas on our programs and services, but they said, hey, I want to find opportunities to meet my neighbors, because when I'm walking down the street, everyone's just staring at their phones. I don't know people. I don't have anybody to talk to. I have no one to reach out to for support. And so we decided to host some events that weren't specific to infant mortality. We did a train ride. We did a town hall meeting, of course, a baby shower, and some other opportunities to bring residents together to not only talk about infant mortality, but get folks to meeting one another. They also recommended working with the faith-based institutions on supporting breastfeeding. One of the young ladies that was a part of our coalition, said that she was at church and they asked her to go into the bathroom to breastfeed her child. So we were able to leverage some funds and offer stipends to 10 churches in 44128 to establish or enhance breastfeeding-friendly spaces. And those were our 2 community-driven kind of efforts. We did door-to-door canvassing, knocking on doors, meeting folks. But now we're advocating for labor and delivery services in that community. Cuyahoga County has 7 labor and delivery hospitals. 5 are on the west side and 2 are on the east side. There is a 50-50 split between births. They're 51% on the west side and 49% on the east side. So there's no reason that there should be inequity in providing labor and delivery. At a minimum, OB triage services. There is a gap in the southeast quadrant, and so families, I also oversee the fetal infant mortality review. We have seen a number of cases where women had gone to one of the emergency rooms in that area and had to be sent to another location, at which time they had lost their child. So was there an opportunity for an intervention to save a baby? So we've got a systems level kind of work going, and then we've got the community grassroots level. So it's kind of a both and. As a result of our efforts, in addition to all the work with First Year Cleveland, there were 0 deaths in 2017 in 44128. Unfortunately, in 2018, there were 5. 4 extreme prematures, all premature deaths, all in the same hotspots, and 1 sleep-related death in the city of Cleveland. But it's still better than when we were doing in the past, and we're continuing our work. Despite ODH changing its, which is our primary funding source, changing its program description, we've kind of hid it in there. So we're continuing to support the work of the coalition, and we're hoping to continue this downward trend.
Thank you very much. And to Councilwoman Conwell's question.
Of course.
Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that it's important that we highlight some of the successes that we've had, as well as the results that you get when you put concentrated efforts in an area, so that we can try to expand that model. So thank you very much. Ms. Rex, Deborah Rex is our next candidate.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you today. And I really appreciate Mr. Budish's thinking that I have something to offer in this capacity, and I'm very motivated about it. As my resume shows, I have a 41-year history of working with children and families professionally ever since I graduated from my master's program. I retired about a year ago as a professional in this field, but every single one of those years was spent working with vulnerable children and families. And I know some of you from that work and know you to care very deeply about children yourselves, and I really appreciate that. Even prior to my professional career, when I was in college, the first 2 years after college, the summer after college, I worked in my hometown, which is in Indiana, as a director of a park program. And that's when I first became aware of child abuse and neglect and the horrible circumstances that I think contribute to child abuse and neglect, and the kind of supports that families needed to not go down that road. So at every juncture of my career decision-making, that experience has stayed with me and has really motivated me to stay on a track of trying to help kids and families. When I was at Cleveland State University, where I finished my bachelor's degree, I have 2 years prior to that at Adrian College, I tutored children at St. Adalbert's School as a volunteer, and I also volunteered tutoring students in Cleveland State University's Special Studies Department, where, you know, I became aware that of some of the disadvantages of the public school system that was turning kids out who were motivated and had some degree of ability to learn, but they hadn't mastered a lot of basic skills. And so when I finished my master's program, my first master's degree from Bowling Green, and had to sort of make a definite direction on my career, I chose to go to the Upward Bound program at Baldwin Wallace College, where I spent 5 years, first as the assistant director and then as the director, working with kids from John Adams, South High, Lincoln West, and West Tech, you know, directly hands-on tutoring them, counseling them, but also administratively putting together a program that would bring them to the college campus in the summers and would help them get the motivation to go to college. And then during the academic year, we would work really hard on their basic skills and help them with their college applications and everything to help them matriculate successfully, including working with them in the summer between graduation and going to college. And what I discovered there in the 5 years I was there was that the biggest impediment was not their motivation, nor was it their basic skills. Those could really be mediated, or those could be worked on. But what really was the biggest challenge was the families, the family situations that they were in, and the difficulty that their families were having that frequently got in the way of the teens being able to go on and be successful. So when I had the opportunity and was approached to apply for the first director of the Bellflower Center for Prevention of Child Abuse organization, which was founded by the Junior League and National Council of Jewish Women, I decided to go that route because part of their vision was to work with parents, teen parents, vulnerable parents, to help them, to support them in their role as parent and to help them have the ability to raise children in a positive way that wouldn't involve abuse and neglect. And we did many, many different things during the 9 years that I was there, and it was a great experience. Did a lot of innovation, a lot of really interesting programming, and I also worked very closely at that time with the Department of Children and Family Services, including serving on the advisory board. At that time, there was an advisory board under Marjorie Hall Ellis and Jerry Haverchek, who were the directors at that time, and found that to be very helpful. I knew from the provider side the things that were frustrating to us about the department, but it also helped me see the department's perspective on the many challenges that they faced to try and keep children safe in this community. I left Bellflower Center when I adopted my daughter, who's my second child, who had spent her first 4 months in foster care. And I felt that I needed to be there more with her. So for a time, I just did part-time organizational consulting with a local organizational development firm. I worked with nonprofit leaders and with small business folks, including, and I don't think she'd mind me saying this, my star counselee or mentee was Nikki Antonio when she was running the Women's Center. From that point, I went to Beachbrook, where I was for the last 27 years of my career, so since 1991. I went there as the associate director, became the chief operating officer, and then the CEO, and helped Beachbrook, with many other people's help, helped Beachbrook grow from serving about 100 children a year, mostly in residential treatment, to serving about 15,000 kids a year in a whole lot of community-based programs, many of which were groundbreaking. Others were best practice implementations in our community. And at the time I left, we had 43 discrete programs that were almost all community-based programs, where we were really working to encourage working with other systems and working with parents directly to help them have the skills and motivation to do a good job, and hopefully getting them the support they needed to, including the family health services that are located out of Stokes Social Services Mall, where we were one of the original 22 years ago, we were one of the original part of the Social Services Mall at Carl B. Stokes. And I think we're the last remaining charter member there. We have a parenting center that has many different programs and is working in the early childhood area, as well as just basic parenting and anger management with dads and things like that. It's a great program. While I was at Beachbrook, I did have to handle many crises, which I think helps me to be more sensitive to the challenges of that for the Department of Children and Family Services when you're dealing with kids and families that are out in the community, and a lot of it is not controllable. There are things you can put into place to try and make good outcomes likely, but you can't control every variable, and you can't always prevent bad outcomes. For example, Beachbrook had a foster child who, you may remember this story, who murdered a young woman in a convenience store in Geauga County. It's many years ago, probably 20 years ago now. That was horrible. That was just a horrible trauma for the whole organization. Similarly, we had a staff person in our residential program who was inappropriately sexual with two of the teenage girls that we had at the time. Those are very hard things to handle. The media descends upon you, and you have to have a story to tell, but at the same time, you've got to hold the spirits of the workers and help the other children that are there. So I really do understand from a firsthand experience the complexity, some of the complexity that Cindy and her team have to deal with all the time. Beachbrook also is Joint Commission accredited, so we really worked hard to have a high set of standards and hold ourselves to a high set of standards. One thing that we put into place was a management philosophy based on learning, Peter Sinjay's learning organization, with an emphasis on we got to get ahead of things. We have to keep looking at what are the challenges going to be, what are the opportunities going to be, and how can we jump around the bend. Because of the innovative work that we did, some of it with the Department of Children and Family Services on the case rate pilot, which was in conjunction with the Annie Casey Foundation, and also with a federal adoption grant called Two Ways Home, where we did some really innovative work with the county. Annie Casey Foundation approached me and asked me to be one of the founding members of the Provider Exchange Network. So for the next 3 or 4 years, I was flown around the country and helped other organizations like Beachbrook develop more community-based alternatives to residential treatment that would work with vulnerable children or vulnerable families to do innovative things that would get them out of a strictly residential treatment route. I've also had the opportunity to do much policy work. The last thing that I worked on that I'm very proud of was the Bridges legislation at the state level, which provides foster kids over 18 with the opportunity to still get housing subsidies and case management and a lot of other really good things, so that they aren't just sort of launched at 18 with nothing. So through all this, I never lost my passion for working at a family-by-family level, but also at a systems level. I think both are really critically important. I do maintain a small consulting practice, and mostly what I'm trying to do is support nonprofit leaders to deal with the rapid changes that are coming because of the behavioral health redesign that just happened at the state level last year, and with the refunding changes that are coming down from the national level in the child welfare area. Really, all of the child-serving policies and funding is being kind of tossed up in the air, and it's really a challenge for people to try and plan for something that's being designed even as we speak. But we know it's going to be happening soon. Children are our future. What I bring to this is not only a lot of experience, but also just an undying optimism for things that can be done to really help kids and families. Yes, there are a lot of challenges. Yes, there are limited resources. Yes, there's violence. Yes, the environment isn't the greatest politically or otherwise right now. But I do think there are a lot of good things that we can do to help kids and families.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Conwell so she can present her question. I'll look to the gentleman too. Okay.
Ms. Rex, would you have any issues with expanding the scope of topics on the Citizens Board?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, Ms. Vex, I'd like to thank you very much for offering your 41 years of experience to this important committee. And my question is over the 41 years, based on everything that you've seen, have we made progress on child welfare, or have we been basically spinning our wheels, going one step forward and two steps back during this time?
Boy, that's a big question. I'd have to think about it. But off the top of my head, what I would say is I think we've gotten much better at the practice, at knowing what works and knowing what's good to do, what the best practices are, and implementing them. I do think the environment in which children and families, in which we are operating, where children and families, I think it's worse now. There's more poverty, there's more violence. So I think at a macro level, the challenges are greater. At the child welfare practice level, I do think we have a much better handle on what to do to help kids.
Madam Chair, Ms. Vex, could you give me a couple of examples of things that we now know about that work well in working with families that we didn't really know about very well 30 or 40 years ago?
Sure. 30 or 40 years ago, there wasn't any in-home work being done at all. There were problems with kids being reported for abuse and neglect, and they were being removed from the home and either put in foster care or put in a residential treatment setting. Now we know that we can intervene much earlier. We can get in when there are just warning signs of problems. If there are resources allocated, we can get into a home, and with a very short-term model, we can really both stabilize the family and we can get them linked to other community resources. And the success rate's pretty good with that. So that would be one thing. I'm not sure how much data there is on this, but I know we found in the Case Rate Pilot Project, which I won't go into in detail, but one of the findings that we had was that if we had the control of if the provider had the control of the finances and we could spend it the way the family needed to keep the kid in the home safely, and we could then pay kin, or do other things to support kin placements, that we could keep kids out of foster care. Even though they were with very high-risk parents, we could keep them in their homes and they would be stable for a long period of time. The follow-up period was 5 years, where the provider was economically liable if the child came back into the system. There was a financial penalty to the provider. And we just found that if we could do the right things, if we could do the things that our caseworkers got in and really could find was needed, we could keep children in homes safely.
All right, thank you very much.
Follow up on that. What was that dollar amount that you guys came up with for that program? Per child, I guess.
I don't remember. It was long enough to know. I don't have the specifics, but it was a program that was designed by the Annie Casey Foundation, and there were 3 private providers and a control group at the County Department of Children and Family Services, and there were 20-some outcome measures. And what we found was if the money was freed up, whatever that amount was, we got better results than either the control group at the county or the other by doing a managed care with heart, I guess I would say, model of going in and finding out what really needs to happen and having the dollars freed up. but I'm sorry, I don't remember. It was in the millions. I know Beechbrook had to go into at risk for like $3 million. I don't remember, but I'm sure Cindy has the detail on it. And it was successful enough that, according to the contract that we had signed initially, Beechbrook was able to keep a significant amount of money for prevention that we plowed back into our prevention services. We gave money back to the county for them to use on their services. I mean, it was a win for everybody. I'm sorry that it didn't continue.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out of retirement to lend us your services. I think that is very noble. Victor, you're up next. You'll give us a brief background and why you'd like to serve on this committee.
Great, thank you very much. I will be brief. First of all, I'm honored and humbled to be here, and I'm also in awe of the talent that is making up this committee, and I'm very excited to be part of that. I'm the executive director of Esperanza. We are a youth and family serving organization, primarily in Cleveland's Hispanic community, and we focus on education. I also serve on the Cuyahoga Community College Board, and I served on the County Charter Review Commission. I've dedicated my entire career to serving children, and this effort furthers that. Primary interest is obviously to ensure that our children are being taken care of, and they are put first, as well as their families, and that the communities that I represent are at the table and that their voices are heard. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for your willingness to serve in this capacity. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues. I know that Councilwoman Conwell has a question, and then we'll follow up right away with Mr. Miller.
To the chair, Mr. Ruiz, would you have any issues with expanding the scope of topics on the Citizens Advisory Board?
Not at all.
And what did you say you currently do? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Executive Director of Esperanza.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
Madam Chair, Mr. Ruiz, I just want to thank you for the fine work that you did on the Charter Review Commission. As you know, we placed the amendments that your commission recommended on the ballot, and they were approved by the voters. And I think the charter has been improved. And we look forward to the perspective that you'll bring to this commission, and sure you'll do well.
Thank you, and thank you for representing my my council. So, thank you.
All right, if there are no further, and thank you for your time. I know this is a very, this is a new committee, so it's very important for us to know exactly who the individuals are, what they bring to the table. So thank you very much for coming out and your patience during this lengthy process. And our final candidate, I think it is Lakeisha. Lakeisha Wild, if you'll please step forward, state your name for the record, give us a little bit of your background and why you're willing to serve on this board.
Hi, my name is Lakeisha Wild. I want to thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I want to give you a little bit of background on why I'm so passionate about being on this board. At birth, I was in foster care, and so that, you know, with the challenges of that, I learned a lot. I was put into foster care. I'm passionate about being, I'm passionate because I was put into foster care of a family that was white, and so I learned a lot about that. I was then adopted at the age of 9, and my family then was white, and just learning about that, and I'm passionate about helping people with those struggles and those concerns. I also learned a lot about when I was 18, I reconnected with my biological family, so I know about, you know, the process of how to do that, and it can be complicated, it can be emotional, it can be stressful, but if it can be done, it is very important to try to reconnect with family. I believe that. When I was in foster care, I also was in residential services as a child, so I know a lot about those types of services. I had a lot of different workers, so I'm passionate about trying to connect to help people to know what kids need, about what was best helpful to me, what was not helpful to me. I also am very passionate about mental illness. I suffer with a mental illness, so learning how to receive services and to flourish and to be a part of society and not to be somebody who doesn't work or doesn't have abilities to go to school and do things like that. So I'm very passionate about all of those different things, and that's why I would really love to be on the board, because I'm of those passions.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Wild, for your very personal testimony. You touched on one of the things in your remarks which piqued a question that, or at least part of Dr. Crampton's testimony relative to being placed in a home with a Caucasian family. And he touched on developing a policy where the individuals would reach out to their extended family members. With you having reconnected with your biological family, if you're comfortable, could you kind of touch on that? Do you think that that would have been something that would have been advantageous for you?
Actually, I think for my situation, the way the struggles my family was going through at the time, I don't know that if anybody at that time in my family would have been able to have well cared for me. So, and for my situation, I am thankful that I was adopted, and then I still, as an adult, got to reconnect with my family. So that is a big part. You know, they're still in my life. It's just at that time, I don't think it would have been the best.
Thank you for sharing, and I think that that is it's a very honest answer. And I think to his point as well as yours, it's just a case by case scenario.
Yeah.
So it's just a personal interest of my own. So thank you for responding. Councilwoman Conwell has her question.
Okay.
And
Absolutely.
okay, all right. And if are there any questions, comments?
Can I ask her another thing?
Absolutely,
So
Councilwoman Conwell.
in being raised with a family different than what you were brought up in, did they respect and bring you up in the culture and that you were?
Absolutely. My family was very influential in making sure that I had what I needed to know who I was and what my background was, and not kind of enforcing or implementing all of their beliefs onto me, but letting me choose to know what my background is, and making sure I had people supporting me who were of my color and of my race, and so I knew all about that. Yes.
Was that in the foster setting?
No, not in the foster setting, but when I was adopted.
Okay, thank
Not
you.
in the foster setting.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Thank you very much for coming before us and your willingness to serve in this capacity. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a heavy. You have Councilwoman Conwell has a question for Ms. Wise-Kettle. So if you, yes.
I also have a comment.
All right.
Through the chair to Director Wise-Kettle, what role do you see your agency playing in assisting this board?
So I think the greatest role that we play is making sure that each of these people bring incredible professional and personal experiences to the table. So I see such a benefit to adding them. I think what will be important is us providing them with the background information and the data they need to make educated suggestions and recommendations about how to move the work forward. It's really very interesting how different and varied their experiences are, which I think just serves to deepen the opportunity to make some real movement in the child welfare system.
Okay, are you planning on looking at just the avenue what's coming from the kids, or actually all around some avenues of actually how the work impacts the workers as well as the children?
I think absolutely. So child welfare obviously is about children, but children live in families if we do it well. And it's important that my staff feel successful in that work. So it is not just about kids, it's about having a staff that is well equipped and emotionally strong to deal with the difficult situations. And frankly, if we can keep children in their families, that's what we need to do. So it's really all of that.
Thank you.
Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair and my colleagues, I would just like to compliment the administration on the extremely high quality of this group of people. Not only is each individual extremely well qualified and has a tremendous experience and background. Also, the totality is greater than the sum of the parts because of the diversity of backgrounds and perspectives, and I believe that this group is going to really make a difference in our child welfare, and I encourage the administration to encourage them to be bold and think outside the box, and for the administration to take their recommendations very seriously, and I believe it can do a lot of good. Thank you.
Well, Dale took my remarks, so, but I think the, if I speak for this committee, that there's the diversity and the wealth of knowledge that has been put forth on this board is to be commended. And so with that said, if there are no additional questions, comments, or concerns, Councilwoman Conwell.
I'll be quick.
No, it's fine.
Through the chair to Michelle or Director Wise-Kettle, is there any charge from the executive in how often you report? This group will report back to him. I know he was very passionate in starting the Citizens Advisory Board.
The executive had made remarks, I know, during the interviews as well as to me, that he wants to stay engaged and involved, but he also wants to step back and give the experts that he's considered to be appointed that opportunity to storm and norm and undertake some of the ideas and sharing first, but that would like to continue to be provided regularly, updated, not in a overseeing type, but just in hopefully finding ways to get to know more about some of the great ideas and the advocacy opportunities that this group can have.
All right. Well, if there are no additional further questions or comments from the committee, I'd like to make a motion to move this to the full body of the council per the request of the administration under second reading suspension. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. If there are no additional questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention for this particular meeting. It was a lot of work, but it is all behind us now. So thank you very, very much. If there's no miscellaneous business, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.